All righty. What's going on here? Why do I have a picture of that woman on the board? Why is she there? Why do you think she's there? Miss Francis? Yes, it's Women's History Month, Ms. Oler. Yes? So, already lost. I'll get her back. Anyways, so I'm celebrating women who have been canonized, in some cases, American women, or on their way to sainthood. I'm going to start with a saint today, Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton. Her name, Elizabeth Ann Seton. It's a picture of her. Might be accurate. It's done after her death, but I'll assume that it's accurate. She was born in 1774, and she died in 1821. As I said, she is saint. She was born in New York City, of what was at the time, you can tell from the date, obviously it was not the United States yet, it was British America. This was a year before, Lexington and Concord and all of that kerfuffle, right, Ms. Moore, Remember Lexington and Concord? Yes. Anyways, sometimes you'll hear she's the first American born saint. She's not the first American saint. That's Mother Cabrini, but Mother Cabrini, whom I'll talk about later, was an immigrant. She was not born here. Elizabeth was born in New York City, but technically it was not the United States yet. It was a colony of the British Empire. It's part of British America. So technically, I would say she's not the first American-born saint, but close. I mean, eventually it became the United States of America, so okay. Nevertheless, she is a saint, and she's a woman, and she, there she is. Hello, Ms. Crumpton. And she was not born a Catholic. She was actually an Episcopalian of the Episcopalian denomination, which is the Church of England by another name, the Church of England, because the national church of England is the Church of England, and that was the national church over here during the colonial time, at least the favored church. But of course, after the Revolutionary War, and we had a big war with the English and the British, they changed the name. They decided to call themselves the Protestant Episcopal Church of America, although they are still in communion with the Church of England and the other Anglican churches, communities throughout the world. Nevertheless, so she was an Episcopalian. And she was a mother. She married a man, okay, and had 5 children. Okay, so she got married. Her husband was a businessman, a very well-to-do businessman, apparently successful. Okay, so they were, I guess you could say wealthy, rich. And as I said, she had 5 children, one of whom, named Catherine, actually became the first American to join the Sisters of Mercy that came over here and were founded in Ireland, right? But came over here to the United States. So she was the first American candidate from America to join the Sisters of Mercy. Now, why might that be important to us? Why might that be an interesting bit of information? Mr. Whitehawk. What do you mean by that? Well, hopefully it's a school of mercy until you get your grades. But yes, the sisters, the same group. Blessed Catherine Macaulay founded the Sisters of Mercy. So this is a direct connection with St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. One of her children became a nun, the first American candidate for the Sisters of Mercy who founded Gwynedd Mercy University, amongst other schools and stuff like that. So that's interesting. I didn't know that. Anyways, as I said, she was a wife, she was a mother. Her husband suffered from tuberculosis, which is caused by a bacterium, and it can be deadly, not always, but it can be, and it certainly was for him because it eventually killed him. Before he died, his doctor, and this was like the medical science of the 1800s. Told him to go to a warmer climate If he goes to a warmer clime, he'll get better, because the ethers, it's more humid, and they thought the weather was healthier and stuff. Okay, fine. So he went to Italy with his wife Elizabeth, where he quickly died. so, so how did that work out, Doc? Anyway, so he died, and he died, and he was buried in Italy. But that's where Elizabeth encountered Catholicism, and she fell in love with it. And 2 years after she returned home, 2 years later, she entered into the Catholic Church, became a Catholic, at the only Catholic church in New York City, which is interesting. You might say, well, why weren't there more? It was even at the time of the Revolution, New York City was a big city. Philadelphia was bigger, actually, I think, but they had anti-Catholic laws at the time, so Catholics weren't allowed to build a lot of churches. Because remember, the Church of England was in charge. They hated the Catholic Church. So anyway, so she, at the only Catholic church in New York City, she became a Catholic. And this was not good for her, because she, at that time, to earn a living and do her work, she was teaching, had a little girls' school that she founded, and she was teaching. She was an educator. But once the Protestant parents found out that she was no longer a Protestant, that she'd become Catholic, they pulled their girls from the school. So that, there was some kind of opposition to that. But, she felt called to religious life, and she was an educator, apparently by nature, because she liked to teach. And so she wanted to found a group of sisters who would specifically teach kids, obviously. And so she did that. She founded, or actually she founded the first American branch of a European group of sisters called the Daughters of Charity, or the Sisters of Charity, which was co-founded by a priest, St. Vincent de Paul, and a nun. I think her name was Louise de Marillac, but don't quote me on that. I think it's Louise de Marillac. But anyways, she decided to bring the order over to America. So she founded this order. She brought it over and founded the first American congregation of these religious sisters. There was some misunderstanding with the group, because the bishops didn't necessarily, or the clergy as well, didn't know what to do with them, because, the tradition was that nuns or consecrated virgins would live in cloister. They would be enclosed in a building where they would pray and do their work, and they wouldn't really go out anywhere. They would be enclosed. So this is kind of what was untraditional about the Sisters of Charity that de Paul and de Marillac founded, was that they were active nuns. They were not cloistered, they're not enclosed, but they actually went out into the community and were doing stuff out in the community, which was kind of novel and revolutionary in a way. So the American clergy didn't always know what to do with this group, Seton's group. So there might have been some misunderstanding and suffering over that. But she persevered, and she developed it, and did a good job. She's considered the founder of the United States parochial school system, from her efforts of founding these schools. So, because there weren't any really at all in the United States, so she laid the foundations for it. So if you went to a Catholic grade school or a Catholic high school, you can thank Elizabeth Ann Seton for that. Or maybe there's words you don't want to thank her for that, depending on your experiences. Yes. Okay. Anyways, eventually she died, of course. Is there anything else I want to say about her? No. 1940, her cause was opened for sainthood. In 1975, by Pope St. Paul VI, she was declared a saint. Seton Hall University. Yeah. So if you know Seton Hall University, it's named after her, of course. So that's where they get the name from St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. And my local Roman parish, they have a little relic in the hallway of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, a little piece of one of her bones. So when I go by it, I can touch it or kiss it, and ask for her prayers. As I do now, I ask St. Elizabeth Ann Seton to pray for us. Yes, pray for us, especially pray for us here at Gwynedd Mercy, because we have that connection with your daughter, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. So, amen. back to the Jews. Yes, Judaism. Okay. I was talking about Zionism. Anything more I wanted to say about that? Theodor Herzl, Zionism. Yes, here we go. So Zionism, just to conclude on that, as I mentioned to you, was not necessarily a religious movement. So you might ask, well, what's it doing here then? It's more of a political idea for Herzl, that he thought that there was latent anti-Semitism in Europe that the Jews were never going to get rid of. So the only thing to do really was for them to leave and have their own nation state where they could, a Jewish state, just like any other country. Like the French have France, the Germans have Germany, the Italians have Italy, so the Jews should have the Jewish state, whatever they want to call that. Israel, obviously, but would be the appropriate word, I guess. But religiously, there was a religious question about this for Jews because, like the remember I mentioned the Reform Jews, who were very much influenced by the Enlightenment and wanted to kind of get away and kind of shave off these kind of superstitious ideas from Judaism and old practices that didn't make sense in the modern world, like circumcision. Zionism was one of those. The idea to reestablish the kingdom of King David, with a Jewish state. To Reform Jews, that made no sense to them. And they explicitly actually rejected Zionism in the beginning stages. It was only after the Holocaust happened that a lot of Reform Jews kind of like said, no, now we see the benefit of this. But at the beginning, because they thought they didn't see it from a religious perspective that they didn't agree with. Why did you need to set up this whole, reestablish this old kingdom and reestablish the temple and stuff like that? No. Those things are from 2,000 years ago. We don't need to do that. But then there were Orthodox Jews, the more traditional, the more conservative-minded Jews, there were some of them who also rejected this idea of Zionism because for religious reasons. Because for them, only the Messiah, the Christ, this King Savior, who would come in the future, could reestablish the kingdom of Israel, not the Jews themselves. It had to be an act of God by sending his Messiah, his Christ, and not Jesus. Mr. Vital, they're not talking about Jesus. So they rejected it for that religious principle. Nevertheless, the idea was there, okay? And it was, controversial even amongst Jews. What changed things and really kind of put an impetus or a push behind the idea was, as I've already mentioned, the Holocaust, okay? 1933 to 1945. 1933, there really was no Holocaust per se. It's more the beginning of the anti-Jewish laws in Germany and stuff like that. Usually people associate the Holocaust with like killing and stuff like that, genocide. And there was no genocide for the first few years. There was just an attempt to restrict the Jews within Germany, and then eventually they were rounded up and then killed. So the Holocaust, or as it's called in Hebrew, the Shoah or HaShoah, which in Hebrew means calamity, tragedy. Don't worry about Korban. I'll pass over that. And so what happened? Well, when you're going to talk about the Holocaust, you have to talk about this man, Adolf Hitler, who lived from 1889 to 1945. Of course, he's associated with the nation state of Germany, but he actually wasn't German. He was actually from Austria. He was Austrian German. So he wasn't German by nationality. And he joined what would later be called a political group called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, the NSDAP, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So they were socialists, that was a popular thing. They were for the workers, They weren't communists per se. They hated the communists, apparently. I don't know why, because they kind of shared some of the same ideas. But yeah, they were for workers and, for government control or intervention on behalf of workers and the means of production, make sure the workers weren't being exploited by the businessmen. So stuff like that. So that's kind of like socially where they were coming from. It was also, this is where the word Nazi comes from, because, in German, it was the let me see if I remember my German, it was the Nationalistische, Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. So you take the first part of Nationalistische, I think, and you just say Nazi. So that's why they're called Nazis, because you don't want to have to keep saying the National Socialist German Workers' Party. But that was their official name. In 1925, you can see on the PowerPoint, he publishes a book, or actually the first volume of a book. I believe there's a second volume called Mein Kampf, which means my struggle in German. What does he see as his struggle? Well, his struggle is to revitalize, reinvigorate Germany. After World War I, in which Germany was involved, they kind of got pummeled. And especially after the peace treaty, Germany was, really kind of hit with a lot of, I would say fines, but what's the word I'm looking for? Well, they had to pay a lot of money to the countries that they invaded and fought with. That usually happens at the end of a war. You have a treaty where, each side, like the aggressor, will oftentimes pay an indemnity or, pay on like a fine in a way for having invaded or done what they did during the war and stuff like that. And so Germany had to pay a huge amount, and the economy was ruined. Even though in the First World War, Germany wasn't necessarily the bad guy. If you read the history of World War I mean, because it had nothing to do with the Jews or anything like that in World War I. It was just like treaty obligations, some duke in Serbia, I think it was, got assassinated. And so that, brought in treaty obligations because the various countries had treaties with Serbia and had to protect them or protect their leaders and stuff like that. And so it quickly spiraled out of control into a bunch of countries declaring war on each other who were on opposite sides. But World War II was different. Hitler wanted to kind of resurrect or raise up Germany and rebuild Germany from that humiliation of World War I, of not just losing, but also having to pay all this money and do all these things and have their country destroyed. And, one of the culprits that he saw, he wanted to reestablish German culture and society, make Germany German, truly German in its values and and the Jews are outsiders. And so were the gypsies, and so were other groups that were outsiders. So they kind of became the targets. They weren't truly Germans. They were actually bad for German society in his view. So he argued for revitalizing German society based on racialism, Germany for the Germans. So the groups that were not German, mainly the Jews, but also included other groups, as I mentioned, like the gypsies, they had to go. Get rid of them. He wasn't saying to kill them, but he was going to get rid of them somehow. Anyways, 1934, obviously I'm collapsing a lot of history here, and I'm not an expert, so I'm relying on the data from the experts. Hitler becomes the leader of Germany, der Führer, which is just what Führen means to lead. There's nothing ominous or evil about the word, but he's called the leader, okay, the leader of Germany. And now that he's in power, he can start putting in his ideas that he expressed in Mein Kampf, which you can find online. It's in the public domain. I've looked at it. I haven't read the whole thing because I'm not that interested. The only thing I did do was I searched for the name of Jesus or Christ in it. It's not there. He mentions Jesus a couple of times, but he won't even mention his name. He says the Nazarene or the Galilean or something like that. But he doesn't even mention Jesus. Maybe because Jesus was still too Jewish for him. I don't know. But anyways, he now can put into practice the stuff that he was rehearsing in Mein Kampf. So start targeting the Jews, start persecuting the Jews to get them to leave, make them leave, and then finally leave them, force them to leave, What ultimately was called, I don't think Hitler came up with this name for it, but someone did in the Nazi Party, the final solution to the Jewish question. That's how it was, the Jewish question. Not, we're going to kill all the Jews or force them to leave, is the Jewish question. What do we do with the Jews? Because the implication is we can't let them live here in Germany still. So we got to do something with them. So what the final solution ultimately became was that all Jews in German-occupied territories, not just Germany, but Austria, which is German, parts of Czechoslovakia, all the places that Germany then invaded during World War II. And I'm not going to give you the history of World War II. You can look that up. Basically, Germany invades Poland. Britain declared, and a bunch of countries declared war on Germany for having invaded Poland. Okay, we got into the war because of Japan, as I told you in the last class, and Germany and Italy were allies of Japan, so they became our enemies. So that's how we got involved, etc. That's the World War II in a nutshell. But before that, no one was doing anything with Hitler. Hitler was doing what he wanted to do. If he never invaded Poland, who knows what would have happened? You know, he might have been able to ultimately go through his plan and annihilate all the Jews and all the other groups he didn't want. Who knows? Nevertheless, he makes that mistake, you could say, of invading Poland. He also makes a further mistake of trying to invade Russia, the Soviet Union, which brings the Soviet Union against him, which was a big mistake. So anyway, so he's there, you know, wherever the Germans have their sphere of influence in the country, in Germany, but also in the countries they invade and take over, France, Poland, Italy, which is not under their control, but they are allied with Benito Mussolini, the fascist leader of Italy. Wherever there are Jews in that territory, they're going to be exterminated. They're going to be packed up on trains, sent to camps for prison, to be imprisoned, and then eventually killed. And so what happens is between 5 to 6 million Jews are killed. Yes, as I told you, I showed you the numbers at the beginning of class. There are about, a little over 15 million Jews right now, right? 15 million? So they're around 14 million, around the same number at the time that the persecution in the World War II was happening. So you can see the devastation. We had about 14 million Jews in Germany, and then like 6 million of them are gone. Almost half of them are gone. And yes, I know on the internet, if you poke around enough, you'll find 2 points of view. You'll find the point of view that denies the Holocaust and said, well, it's just a myth, didn't really happen, or it didn't happen to that extent. Okay, but then you have to me, my first question is, well, you had 6 million people there before, and after 1945, when they released the camps, you have 6 million people who aren't there after. Where did they go? Where did they go? Did they mass migrate and nobody noticed? Did they all move somewhere and they're all, I don't know, in the Russian forests or something? They went out to Siberia and they all been hiding there for the last 80 years? I don't know. It's kind of like people who say 9/11 was an inside job. It's like, where'd all the people who were on the planes go? They're all hiding. They're all in on the conspiracies. I don't know. So I haven't gotten a good answer to that. Those who are, they say it's conspiracy theory, but these people think they have some data behind it, that it was just a hoax. Okay, well, we know the camps were there because pictures. So we have pictures of the Jews imprisoned in camps. We also have pictures of the dead bodies. So we know they were killing them, or at least Jews were dying in the camps, maybe from starvation, maybe just being killed. Well, we know they were killed because we also have images of them being shot in mass graves. Where did they go? And then there are those people on the internet who will say they won't deny the Holocaust and they think that's a good thing. Yes, the Jews were a problem. Hitler had to do it. It's like, okay. But to me, that's going into crazy land. But okay. So I think I'm taking it. I'm going to assume that the Holocaust happened because we have evidence of it. I'm also going to assume that it was not a good thing. Right? Would anyone like to read this? I don't know if you want to read this. Maybe it will trigger somebody. If you want me to read it, I'll read it. But just a little snippet about Adolf, get us a kind of a flavor of how Hitler felt about the Jews from Mein Kampf. Would anyone like to read that, or just want me to read it? No, go ahead, Miss Francis.
Judaism remains a parasite, a sponge who, like a vicious bacillus, spreads over wider and wider areas. The effect produced by his presence is also like that of the vampire. For wherever he establishes himself, the people who grant him hospitality are bound to be bled to death sooner or later.
Yes, a vampire. Interesting. A parasite. A sponger. A bacillus. Well, what do you do with a bacillus? You get rid of it. Get antibiotics to kill it. So he doesn't say that, but it's kind of like where it's leading to. How do you get rid? What do you do with a vampire? You put a stake through its heart. You don't say, "Oh, Mr. Vampire, will you just maybe leave, go somewhere else? We'll send you like Western Australia or something. Just leave Germany." No, you kill it. You put a stake through its heart. So that's where it's leading to. I think that's obvious. And here we have pictures of all the dead bodies that not all of them, but some of the dead bodies that were found in the camps when the Allies, the Americans, the British, the Soviets, the Russians showed up. They found all these dead bodies that they were burning to mainly get rid of the evidence. So there it is. And I'll read this. This is from a memo that was written by Hermann Goering, who was writing to Reinhard Heydrich, talking about the Jewish question, and this is where he comes up kind of with this idea of this final solution. He says, complementing the task that was assigned to you, meaning Heydrich. All right, you have to put this into practice. Who dealt with arriving at a solution of the Jewish problem as advantageously as possible. I hereby charge you making all necessary preparations in regard to organizational, financial matters for bringing about a complete solution of the Jewish question in the German sphere of influence in Europe. Okay, so this is kind of like, he doesn't say it; it's like a memo, and so it's kind of like in that bureaucrat kind of language. But he's basically saying, here's the money and the construction materials to start building the camps, to start rounding up the Jews and bring them to the final solution. Okay, not a solution, but a final one, so we don't have to deal with it anymore. And as I should say that, I should add to this, and I've kind of already hinted at this or said this already, this involved other groups that were considered like non-German or did not fulfill or live up to what you might call German values. So as I said, gypsies who ethnically seem to be from India, they're called Romani, but they seem to be ethnically Indian in their background. They kind of wander around from different countries. All countries kind of have them. Ireland, in Ireland, they're called tinkers and stuff like that. And they have them in France and stuff still. And they had them in Germany. So, a lot of the Romanis were rounded up. The disabled, anyone who was disabled would be euthanized. Homosexuals, they have special camps for homosexuals. And then, of course, political prisoners, anyone who just opposed the regime. They had camps for them as well. But their main focus, obviously, just from the sheer level of massacre, was the Jews. So about 5 to 6 million Jews were killed, and then about 5 to 6 million other groups were killed. So in total, you have 12 million people who were killed in these various camps by the Nazi regime. But obviously, half of them were Jews, to kind of see who they were going for. So that affects Jewish self-identity. From a religious perspective, it raises the question of where was our God, okay, for Judaism. But it also gives impetus to the need for a Jewish state, okay, which some people see religiously, others people see it ethnically. Nevertheless, we go to the next stage. After the war, after the Second World War, Palestine, as it was called, you see there the flag for Palestine, and you can see also the Union Jack of Great Britain, Palestine was under mandate or under the control of the United Kingdom. The United Nations kind of ceded control to Palestine to the British to kind of govern and take care of until they figured out what to do with it. Okay. There were, it's an extremely complicated history, and that I'm not an expert in. And obviously, it's very much debated, even up to this very day. Still issues with it. So, I can only summarize and give you some ideas, but it was under the UN control, which was given to Britain. And the British wanted to get rid of it. Okay, they wanted to end their mandate. Okay, because you had Arabs living there, Palestinian Arabs. But after World War II, you had a lot of Jews from Europe and Eastern Europe who were starting to migrate into Palestine, as it was called at the time, and to set up communities and buying up land, which was kind of a source of tension for the local Arabs who had already been living there. Because from their point of view, these people were foreigners. They hadn't been living there. They're just coming in. From the point of view of the Jews, this was our homeland. We had lived here for thousands of years and we're coming back. And there had been Jews in the area always in the Middle East, just not a big community. So the British wanted to kind of get out of there, and they apparently made conflicting assurances to both groups of people. To the Arabs saying, "Don't worry, you'll have your own state, you'll be fine," and to the Jewish groups saying, "Yes, you can come back and have your own state." The Arab leaders thought that Palestine would be independent, mostly Arab controlled, and to the Jews, they kind of thought that the British were saying they'd get a Jewish state, which didn't happen that way. God bless you. We come to, now even, as I said, it's a very complicated history because, we have the war that's going on there right now because of terrorism, but there was terrorism even when the British were there. And it's a complicated history, as I said, because it was mainly Jewish terrorism. There were Jewish terrorist groups that were blowing stuff up to kind of get the British to leave so that they could take over. So, of course, the Palestinians remember that. And then, of course, the Israelis remember the decades after independence where they've had terrorist attacks from Palestinians. So it's kind of gone back and forth. Neither group was averse to using terrorism. Anyways, 1948 comes. The British were planning to hand Palestine back over to the United Nations. And they were planning to divide it to where, in a certain way where the places where all the Jews were living would be an independent Jewish state, and the places where all the Arabs were living would be an independent Arab state, kind of embedded into each other, and just leave it alone. Let each party go its way, whatever. That didn't happen. The day before there was to be the handing over, Jewish leaders simply declared independence for the whole area. The whole area of Palestine is now just a Jewish state, period. No, nothing to do with Arab. What do you do with all the Arabs that are there, that are living there, who aren't Jews, Anyways, doesn't matter. Surrounding Arab countries like Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq immediately declared war on this new state of Israel, this new country they were declaring. But Israel won. Israel won the war, defeated them, and established itself as the new country. So now you have their independent state. And it's a Jewish state, so they want Jews to come there. So they establish the law of return, or in Hebrew it's called aliyah, so you can see the religious overtones already very early on in this, Pilgrimage. You're making pilgrimage back into your homeland. You're making a pilgrimage. Usually you make pilgrimage to like a holy site or a sacred site. So you're coming back to the homeland. It's the right of any Jew anywhere in the world to emigrate to Israel as a full citizen. So all you have to basically do is tell the Israeli government, prove that you're Jewish, of course. I'm born of a Jewish mother, or I'm a convert. So you're a Jew. Do you want to come back? Yes. Boom. And it's not totally that easy. Obviously there's probably some paperwork that has to be filled out, but it's not hard. Because they want Jews to come back to the Jewish state. So they established the law of return in 1950, where Jews make aliyah. And this, this Declaration of Independence caps off what's called the Arab-Israeli conflict, which is continuing even right now as I speak. Yes. Let's see here. I'll cut on that. All right. So that's the history. So this is in the background. This is things that are going on. This, of course, Israel has all sorts of religious implications. I mean, a lot of but half the population in the modern state of Israel is really secular Jews. They're non-religious at all. The other half are, and really, especially the Orthodox, who are the very traditional, very conservative Jews, are the ones who have the influence in the government. Okay, so while yes, it is a political entity, a country, Israel, it also has that layer of religion. So, for example, how you make aliyah, you have to follow the traditional law. You can't just say, well, my father was Jewish. Nope. The Orthodox rabbis say, no, that's not the traditional law. You have to be born of a Jewish mother or a convert. So they determine which kind of person can come back to Israel, or if you're a Jew, your status. The kosher laws, the butchers have to be, if they're kosher butchers, they have to be certified by the local rabbis, which is the government. And they can they can fine people who are not following Jewish religious law. What happens on the Sabbath? What you can do on the Sabbath, even if you're not a Jew. If you're a Jew, you should be following your Sabbath rules. But what if you're a Christian, an Arab Christian or a Muslim or something, and you're out for a run on Saturday? Now that can cause issues, religious issues, because it's a Jewish state. You should be following the Jewish religious laws, and especially depending on which areas you're running in. If you're running in like an Orthodox Jewish area, I wouldn't. I might get hit with a few stones because you're breaking the law of Moses, and this is God. This is Israel, the Jewish state. You're breaking Jewish law, religious law. So even though it is a political entity, the religion's always there and involved in some way. Okay, yeah. This one I put this. Here are some Jews, Orthodox Jews. The Messiah hasn't come, so they reject the state of Israel. Here they are, free Palestine. Judaism rejects Zionism. These are Orthodox Jews. So it's not just Palestinian Arabs that might have a problem with Zionism. There are some Jews that still have a problem with it because the Messiah hasn't come. All right, let's talk about the teachings, the scriptures. The Torah. The Torah, which in Hebrew means teaching or instruction. Instruction is probably the more literal meaning of the word in Hebrew, to instruct, but to teach, synonymous, I guess. And what is the Torah? Well, generally, it's the name for all the teachings of the Jewish religion, not just those that have been written, Ms. Vesey, but also those that have been passed on orally, like I'm doing right now with you. I'm telling you. Yeah? So stuff that's been written and passed on by word of mouth. And so you have two different types of Torah. You have Torah shebichtav, or shebichtav, instruction that is from a writing. Chatav in Hebrew means to write. And then you have Torah shebe'al peh, Torah which comes out of the mouth. Instruction that comes out of the mouth. All right. Shebichtav, written Torah, would be the Tanakh or the Bible. Jews don't call it the Bible, but just for sake of understanding the Bible, but they call it the Tanakh commonly. So the written scriptures. And then the oral law, which also has been written down, so just go with it. I know it's written down, but it's the oral law, which was written down, is the Talmud. So you have two things going on here. The Torah is contained both in the Bible, but also in this collection of the oral teaching that's been organized and written down in the Talmud. So you're dealing with two things here. Let's talk about the Tanakh first. This will be more familiar to you who are Christians, not the Catholics in the classroom, but the Christian. The Presbyterians and the Baptists, you'll know what I'm talking about here. The Catholics will be like, what, Bible? I heard the priest talk about that sometime during confirmation class, but... Yes, the Tanakh, or the Bible. God bless you, or feel better, which is the Jews' name for their sacred writings. That's what they usually refer to them, the Tanakh. They have a whole bunch of other names for it as well, which can get confusing, but basically just go with Tanakh, all right? And Tanakh is actually an acronym. It's a Hebrew acronym. What is an acronym? Ms. Fofana, do you know what an acronym is? Okay, yes, I didn't hear the first part though. Good, yeah, shorter version for another word. How does it work? How does an acronym work? Yeah, we use letters, right? Usually maybe the first letters or something. So instead of saying the National Aeronautical and Space Administration, I say what? Yeah. Instead of saying the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I say what? Yeah. All right. Instead of saying you only live once, I say what? Oh, by the way, Ramadan? Yes, Ramadan has started. For Islam, we'll get to Ramadan later in the course, but yes, the holy month of Ramadan has started. They fast, a time of fasting, and presume extra prayers. And what's starting tomorrow or another religious? Yes, great fast. I'm Eastern Christian, so it started from Nestor's Tabernacles. But yes, Roman Catholics, Ash Wednesday, day of fast and abstinence. Okay, so the Tanakh, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so this is a Hebrew acronym. So you take, there are 3 sections to the Tanakh: the Torah, the written Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. So I'll explain in a moment, but just take the first letters, the T, the N, and the K, and then you put A's in between them, typically. I mean, it diverges, it changes sometimes, but yeah, so there you go, Tanakh. And Jews love to do this. They use all sorts of acronyms, which can drive me batty trying to figure out what they're trying to talk about. But it's like, trying to, I don't know, deal with a group of rappers, They got all these weird names and stuff is abbreviated, and that's how Jews are. They do all sorts of acronyms. They can't just say, okay, I'm reading the Bible or the Torah or the whatever. No, Tanakh, or Chumash, or Mikam, or Mikah, or... You gotta figure out what they're talking about. Anyway, so Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the 3 parts of the written Torah. What are they? Okay, the written Torah. Whoops. I guess I didn't want to do that. I guess I will. Come back to this. What are these parts? The Torah is also called the law. So in the Torah proper, the written Torah, you're going to find all the rules and the laws, for the most part, that Jews are supposed to live. Okay? The Nevi'im is the second collection. The Torah is the most important, but then number 2 is the Nevi'im, which comes from the Hebrew word nabi, which means a prophet, a seer, translated prophet, but literally probably means someone who's a seer, but a prophet, someone who speaks on behalf of the God. And then the Ketuvim comes from katab in Hebrew, which I told you means to write. So the writings, Ketuvim, are writings. So anything that was not part of the law or didn't qualify as a prophet or a prophetical book got dumped into the writings, just the general writings, Ketuvim. So that's how they divided, the Jews eventually divided up their sacred law, then the books of the prophets, and then whatever else doesn't fit in either as law or a prophet, dump it in the Ketuvim. So we'll start with first the written Torah, the first part of the Tanakh, and there's your definition. It's the revelation given to God, by God, to Moses, our friend Moses, that is written down in the first 5 books of the Tanakh. Okay, so basically it's the first 5 books of the Tanakh. Traditionally, the Torah, the written Torah, was revealed to Moses in its totality, the whole written Torah, all the 5 books, and it's the source of oral tradition as well. So, even the oral tradition is believed to have been somehow revealed to Moses at the same time and then passed on. So Moses wrote down these 5 books, but he also passed on the oral Torah to later leaders. The material contained in these books developed over centuries. You have some very old stories in it and stuff, but you also have some new stuff. And it developed, beginning with the United Kingdom of David is when scholars think that a lot of this stuff started, or some of this stuff started to be written down, especially the stories of the royal court, the kings, the histories of the kings. And then around the time of, say, Ezra, after the exile in the 400s, is when they really started writing a lot of stuff down, and it probably got put into its almost final form. So sometime between the 900s and the 400s, some of these traditions and stories started to be written down, is what scholars think. As I said, especially after the exile. The 5 books are called the Pentateuch as well. The Pentateuch. People also call it the Law of Moses, but the Pentateuch, it's another word for the Torah. Okay, pente in Greek means 5. If you take in geometry, pentagram or pentagon. Chukos means a hinge in Greek. So you could say, as I translated there, the 5 volumes, 5 hinges, but the 5 volumes of the law: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Genesis is more a storybook. You do find some things in it that are legal and rules based, but Genesis is mostly telling the stories of the patriarchs and how they got to Egypt. So it's a lot of stories. Exodus is a combination of the story of the Exodus, how the arrival, the birth of Moses, and how he becomes a liberator, and the Jews leave Egypt. And then that's like the first half of Exodus, and the rest of the half is basically rules and laws, like how to build their worship structure, the tent that they carried around in the desert, they set up to worship their God. Other rules are given. And then all these other books, there are some stories in them as well, but they're mainly rules, focused on rules. Leviticus, very much so. Numbers has a few stories about the time of the Jews in the desert, but a lot of rules, and Deuteronomy is all rules. So if you look at this, you see the dominance of Moses, because from Exodus to Deuteronomy, it's all Moses and the giving of the law. So it's very important. And Genesis is just building up to, the giving of the law. So law in Hebrew is the word halakha. So these are things you have to do, definitely. But God also gives mitzvot, or mitzvah in the singular, commandments, commands. And I have to really ask a rabbi how they distinguish, because I don't believe that you'd interpret them in the same way. I don't know which has more weight, a halakha or a mitzvah. Because you have to do both with equal weight. I'm not sure. I think halakha might be the weightier of the two. But anyways, they distinguish between laws and commands. So when we, watched, what's her name, Sarah, in the mikvah, she said, in Hebrew, blessed are you, God of the universe, because you've given us the commands, you've taught us your commands about the mikvah, about the baptism, the dunking in water, okay? So you thank God for his commands that he's given us in the law, in the Pentateuch, the 5 volumes. Okay, so, and I'll talk more about this later, but just I'll mention it. You have the 10 Commandments, or maybe I'll mention this. When I mention the 10 Commandments, because I talk about the 10 Commandments later. I do, but I wonder if I want to, maybe I'll do that. Talk about this, then I do that. Okay, I'll move on. The prophets. The Nevi'im. Told you the Hebrew word Nabi means someone who sees, a visionary. A prophet, one who has a message from a God. And there's a definition. Someone who speaks on behalf of God about current or future events. So they're seers who passed on messages from God. They're cultic functionaries. Cult means worship from Latin. That's all it means. It doesn't mean, like Jim Jones and drinking the Kool-Aid. It's cultus in Latin simply means the worship you give to a spirit or a god. So they were involved they had worship functions within Israelite religion. So they were cultic functionaries who would reveal the unknown, the will of God to people. You would go to a prophet, almost like going to a psychic or an astrologer today. You go to the Jewish prophet and you might throw some bones on the ground or do something, or, inhale some smoke or something from the fire or whatever, and then give you some kind of message from God, And it was usually, he or she, there were also female prophets, would go basically into an ecstasy, a trance, you might say. The prophets had social functions. They had religious functions. So, the kings of Israel oftentimes had court prophets that they could, consult for, tell me what God thinks. Should I go and do battle with this person? Go out to war? Should I do this, that, and give advice? Okay, well, I've consulted God and he says, no, this is a bad omen. You shouldn't do this. So they had a social function, but they also have religious functions. Especially reminding the Jews of their obligations to God, their special relationship with God. No one really liked the prophets. Prophets were usually not a good thing. When a prophet showed up, it was usually not a good thing. Usually the prophet's message was one of, you're not doing what God wants you to do. And that's usually what you find in the books of the Nevi'im. I'm not going to. Oh, yeah, I put that on there. Some of the major prophets in the Nevi'im, major because they have the longest books, basically, are Isaiah, these three men, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Isaiah flourished in the 8th century BC in Israel, I should say Judah, excuse me, in Judah. So he was of the southern kingdom, and he prophesied during the time when the Assyrians destroyed the kingdom of Israel in the north, and the Judahites were all afraid that Assyria was going to destroy them too. But Isaiah said, "Don't worry, God will protect you from the Assyrians," which apparently he did. Apparently the Assyrian army all got the flu or something, some plague, and they all just retreated away and went away, and no one exactly knows what happened, but there was some kind of plague in the camp. Maybe they all got the flu or something, who knows. But so that's Isaiah prophesying during that time the destruction of Israel in the north. Jeremiah, who flourishes in the 7th century to the 6th century, he prophesies during this destruction of Judah in the south, when the Babylonians show up. And he basically tells the Judahites to surrender. He says, don't fight them. Don't try to make alliances like Egypt or someplace to try and fight against the Babylonians. They're too strong. Surrender, and we'll be at peace. Yes, we'll be subject to them, but we'll be at peace. We'll still exist. We won't be destroyed. And so a lot of people hated Jeremiah. They saw him as a traitor. And eventually his prophecy comes true. They try to. Judah tries to revolt against the Babylonians. The Babylonians come back and crush them, and that's the end of the kingdom. And apparently Jeremiah is sent into exile with other Jews. And according to tradition, this is not in the Bible, but according to Jewish tradition, a bunch of Jews killed Jeremiah eventually. I guess because they hated him so much, because they wanted to redirect their rage at the destruction of the kingdom. Ezekiel flourishes in the 500s, and he's the only prophet we have prophesying from exile. He's prophesying outside of the land of Israel, interestingly enough, which is actually significant because it shows that Israel's God can do anything anywhere he wants. He's not bound to his own territory. Because in Babylon, Ezekiel's in Babylon, in Mesopotamia, as an exile, and he's prophesying to the Jews in exile in Mesopotamia. His prophecy is like, I got you. Give me a second. It's about Jerusalem, for example. The Jews in Mesopotamia thought, well, yes, we lost the kingdom, but Jerusalem will never be destroyed. Jerusalem is the house, is the present, has the presence of God. God would never allow his sacred city to be destroyed. Ezekiel's like, don't bet on it. They're going to destroy it, and it was. His prophecy came true. And he begins the interpretation of the exile for the Jews. Why did this happen to us? And his explanation is that, well, we were exiled because of our sins. We didn't follow the law of God like we were supposed to. Yes, Mr. Belfield.
And like can prophets like coexist? Like do they ever like butt heads?
Oh yeah.
Word.
Prophet that God likes, he favors. Prophet that he doesn't.
Who decides that like something happened?
Usually the prophet who gets to write the books in the Bible. Whoever wins.
And were they ever wrong or like a liar?
People didn't believe them. No, usually the prophet, no, what distinguished a prophet, a true prophet from a false prophet, was that what the true prophet said came true. And if what the false prophet said did not come true, then, he was speaking falsely, not really, he's speaking his own ideas, or the assumption is. Now, how do you prove that? I mean, how do you say, well, my stuff comes true? Because, yes, sometimes things that the prophets that were considered legitimate are in the Jewish scriptures, like Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel, didn't come true. Like Isaiah you read Isaiah, there are parts of Isaiah that are like, Israel we're impregnable. Jerusalem will never be destroyed. It'll exist forever. God will protect us. Well, we know by the time of Jeremiah, it's like, they're under attack and they're eventually invaded and destroyed. So does that mean Isaiah was wrong in his prophecy that Israel would last forever? Yeah, that was one of the questions that Ezekiel had to address. Why didn't this come true? And Ezekiel is an interesting prophet because he says, God tells him, just tell them what I want you to tell them anyways, because they'll come to you. They'll come to you and say, oh, tell us what the Lord has to say today. Give us a prophecy from the Lord. It's like, you're a magician or something, or perform, tell us jokes, Ezekiel. Do that card trick, Ezekiel. And the Lord says to Ezekiel, just tell them what I tell you to say, because they won't listen to you. But when it comes true, they'll know a prophet is. We believe you now, think you're false, but we'll believe you later. Anyways. And yes, the prophets could butt heads with Jeremiah. There were the prophets of the king who were predicting success. They say, hey, we just make an alliance with like Egypt and, we'll march out to battle. God will be with us. We're his people and we'll destroy the Babylonians. Just like what happened with Isaiah, when the Assyrians came. God protected us. So they would again, And Jeremiah's like, no, that's not going to happen this time. And they're like, shut up, Jeremiah. One of the prophets actually slaps Jeremiah across the face. Jeremiah says, makes a prophecy. He says, you will be found back. He said, you'll be found in the inner room of the house. Which means that, what he's talking about is that when the armies come, you'll be cringing in fear in the back of the house. Well, that's where you'll be found and be killed. And it happened. The guy was false, he was a false prophet. Like, I'm telling the truth. But they did, they threw Jeremiah in prison, they wanted to kill him, But when his prophecy came true, that Babylon did destroy them, they're like, oh, well, Jeremiah, so he's a true prophet. Yeah. So, it's kind of like, I wish I could give you a better answer, Mr. Belfield, but it's kind of like the winners, whoever's book, is in the Bible, those are the winners, and the losers are, the Jews eventually determined, well, these were false prophets, obviously, because we don't think their stuff came true, but these were reliable prophets because most of their stuff like this came true. Yeah.
Do they get to choose their names? Or just coincidence? Like, I don't even know Isaiah because, but it means God saves. It just happens that he's telling everyone like God's going to save them. Like, is that coincidence or?
No, it might be. It might be a coincidence, but usually in the case, these are probably their given names. These are probably their given names. These are not like nicknames or things that they took on themselves. Yeah, in some cases, maybe. Like the prophet Malachi means my messenger in Hebrew. So scholars think it might be a nickname for the prophet who wrote the book. His name is not really Malachi, but it's my messenger. Okay, but in the case of something like the Yeshayahu or Yehezkiel, no, those are not necessarily. Those are probably proper names.
And of course, the belief that they're like a true prophet.
Okay, yeah, I wouldn't. But their name can be like what you're saying is their name can become reinterpreted later on, because you said he's talking a lot about salvation in his work, right? So Yeshayahu, God is the Savior, God saves, which is related to the name of Jesus, Yeshoshua. God is the Savior, God will save you. So yeah, that might make sense.
So it might not have meant that at the time.
At the time, I think it meant this is proper name. This was his name he was given. It's not an uncommon name. Jesus, Hosea, Isaiah, they're all based on the same root word, save, salvation, God saves. Yeah, they all basically mean the same thing. So it was not an uncommon name amongst Jews. All right, where am I here? Okay, so these are the three great prophets. But also, if you look at the Nevi'im, interestingly, it also includes certain history books, like the histories of King David and some of the kings of Israel and Judah. Okay, yeah. So it's some of the things that you might not think are prophecy, read more like history, are also included amongst the prophets. And King David was kind of considered a prophet, so that might be one of the reasons they include them. Do I want to say that? I think I might say that. This is a picture of what's called the Great Isaiah Scroll, which was found in 1946 in southern Israel. They found some shepherd boy. It's always some shepherd boy. When it's you're finding archaeological stuff in Israel, some shepherd boy or some old woman who's digging through the trash. But anyways, some shepherd boy was wandering around and poking around and found a cave and found a whole bunch of urns and pots with writings in them, scrolls, and he didn't know what they are. In fact, he took them back to his family. They were just using them as fire for to make fire so they could cook their food. They saw it as a source of fuel. But somebody, it's one of those things where some scholar or some archaeologist, someone who could read ancient Hebrew, happened along, one of these things you can't make up, and looked at one of the fragments or whatever that they were burning, and was like, "Wow, get that out of the fire, get this away from the fire." It's like someone throwing away the Mona Lisa into the fire. This is important. This is obviously old, and it's related to the Bible. I recognize this, And so, now show me, he had, whoever this was, had the kids show them where the cave was, and they found other caves. It's a place called Qumran, very famous place in southern Israel, Qumran, where a bunch of Jews lived around the time of Jesus, the 1st century AD. And so we have a whole bunch of their writings, including their copyings of the Bible. And from Qumran, we get this, the Isaiah Scroll, or the Great Isaiah Scroll, which is a complete scroll of the prophet Isaiah. And it's our earliest writing of the Hebrew Bible that we have. The scroll dates from around 300s BC. 300s BC. So now we can compare the Hebrew text here, such as it is, with the later text that's been handed on. Because before that, the Hebrew text we had was really from the Middle Ages. From the Middle Ages. I think around like the 1100s, 1200s, our earliest, well, I don't want to say. I know it was the Middle Ages of the AD period. So several hundreds and hundreds, maybe even 1,000 years later. So this was a great find. So now you can compare it and see how accurate it is and what changes have been made or whatever, how accurately it's been copied down or remembered. Now we get to the Ketuvim. Where am I here? The Ketuvim. The Ketuvim, from Katab to write. The Ketuvim is a grab bag of stuff. It has histories. It's full of history books, like the books of Chronicles, 2 books of Chronicles, poetry, like the Song of Songs, which is one big long poem about sex. It's a poem of a man, a groom singing to his bride, and she sings back to him. There's all sorts of erotic imagery in it. Hymns like the Psalms, holy songs, songs sung to God, hymns, philosophical reflection like the book of Ecclesiastes. What's the point of life? What's the point of living a good life when we all die? It's the question of Ecclesiastes. He doesn't have an answer. Short stories. So this is appropriate for the month of Women's History Month. Esther, the book of Esther, a woman, Jewish woman. The book of Ruth, who is not a Jewish woman, but converts to Judaism, and becomes, I think, the grandmother of King David. So the book of Ruth. Also, if you have a Catholic Bible, Eastern Orthodox Bible, they also include the book of Judith. So that's interesting. At least for the Jews, you have at least 2 books devoted solely to women, Esther and Ruth. And women appear throughout other books as well, like the book of Judges. Some of the women are heroines, like Deborah. So women are prominent in a lot of ways. So it's a grab bag. It's a collection of different genres, everything that didn't fit into the law or fit into the prophets. They just put in this section. Okay? Now we get to the oral Torah, the Talmud. Talmud, there's your definition, a large compilation of commentary by later Jewish scholars on early Jewish oral tradition. Oral tradition. Comes from a Hebrew word which means to learn or to study. To learn or to study. Lamad in Hebrew. I didn't put it on the PowerPoint. Lamad. To learn or to study. So it's the study. It's the study, the thing you study. And it contains the oral Torah. So the Talmud was written sometime between, I'll put that on the board. It was formed sometime between 100 and 600 AD. Between 100 and 600 AD. And it is composed of 2 parts, the Mishnah and then the Gemara. The Gemara. The Mishnah comes first, and then the Gemara is a commentary on the Mishnah. Okay? See how that works? Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. So the Talmud is a vast collection. You can see there a picture. You see all the volumes. It's a vast collection of the teachings and opinions of the rabbis. And it's based on the Mishnah, which I'll talk about in a moment, maybe. And it's based on the Mishnah. And the Talmud is the embodiment of the oral Torah that was given to Moses also on Mount Sinai by God. So Moses got the written Torah, which he wrote down in the Pentateuch, but then Moses got the oral Torah, which he passed on orally through, guess who? The prophets, first of all. And the prophets passed it on to our friend Ezra the scribe, sometimes called the father of Judaism, Ezra. And then Ezra passed it on to a group of sages called the Tanaim. The Tanaim. Go from Moses, the various prophets, to Ezra, the great Ezra, and then Ezra to this group of scholars or wise men called the Tanas or the Tanaim. So you can see the chain of custody. They want to establish the chain of transmission for the oral Torah. Okay? And eventually the oral Torah, the Mishnah the oral Torah that was given to the Tanaim will be eventually written down in what will be called the Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah. The Tanaim's reflection, or what they've received ultimately from Moses, will be written down, and that's called the Mishnah. So the Talmud is second in authority to the written Torah itself, because the written Torah is God's revelation. Talmud's not revealed from God, but it's pretty important for Jews. It's second in authority to the Torah. And what does it contain? It contains legal discussions of the law, stories, a lot of it has stories, biblical commentary, all sorts of stuff. And if you've read by now, if you're keeping up with the readings, even though I know I'm off in the lectures, but if you're keeping up with the readings, has anyone read the Babylonian Talmud yet? The reading from the Babylonian Talmud? Looked at it? Even if you didn't read it, just looked at it? Ms. Uttenreither? No? Ms. Uttenreither? Hello, Ms. Uttenreither. Come back to me, Ms. Uttenreither. She's having a vision. Ms. Bessie, Babylonian Talmud? Yes? No? Might be on the quiz next week, but it's supposed to be read. Hopefully you'll read it. Anywho, you'll notice quite quickly when you read it that it's the opinion that's basically giving the opinion. It'll give the Mishnah and it'll give the opinions of various rabbis, often just quoted in succession. Rabbi so-and-so says this in the name of Rabbi so-and-so in the name of Rabbi so-and-so, and you get to a point where you don't even know which rabbi is being quoted anymore. Okay? And then we'll give the reasoning behind. So I'll finish with this. Just give me one more second and then we can go. The Talmud contains both majority and minority opinions. So it doesn't just contain the majority view amongst the rabbis. It also includes contrary voices, people who might maybe one or two rabbis that might disagree with the general opinion of how to, say, interpret a certain oral tradition, a halakha or something that comes. So scholars look at the Talmud more as a record of discussion than a clear series of rulings and decisions. That's what you have to kind of understand and wrap your head around. It's meant to kind of, if you're a Jew studying it, it's meant to bring you in so you can start making your own interpretations and coming up with your own ideas of how this Mishnah or whatever that's been handed on to us should be understood and should be interpreted. And it kind of gives you guidance. You enter into the discussion with these other ancient rabbis before you. And you come up with your own idea. You're not going to look to the Talmud for like an absolute, like this is what you have to do absolutely. Okay? You'll have Rabbi A says you should do this. Rabbi B says, oh, you should do this, but only in this circumstance. Rabbi C says, no, not even in that circumstance. You should do something else. And then you as the Talmudist or as a Jew are like using your own knowledge and reason is like, okay, so what should I do? It doesn't give you necessarily a clear ruling on something. Okay. All right, I'll stop here and come back to it on Thursday. God bless you all. Have a good day. Oh, yes, give me a minute, please, because I don't want to talk when other people are around. Well, that's weird. Well, that's the mission. Oh, yeah, that's the mission. Confusing myself here. Have a good day, Miss Crumpton, Miss Boritz.